and evil, to use the morally correct word, has to begin with this. It's an individual struggle that all of us have to do, but it's a collective struggle. And if those of us who are working for the light can come together in discourse, common research, work in institutions that we can create, which are not corrupt and not corruptible, then we can help birth this Sat Yuga, the golden age of truth, which is what's needed. This is the final, crew of demons who've been running Kali Yuga. Well, enough is enough, guys. And we can discuss whether, this pandemic to me is the quintessence of that. It's the end of the line. It's that sort of demonic catastrophe. Whether it was somehow leaked through nescient scientists making mistakes, or the jury's out. And there needs to be further research, further documentation on that. And I know that true scientists would be abhorrent to that. And in the Wisdom Keepers gathering, which we've just also had, we have once a month, I've called again for the idea of a oath, like the Hippocratic Oath, for all scientists worldwide to swear when they graduate. You can't get a scientific degree without making that oath, like the Hippocratic Oath. You can't become a doctor unless you swear not to misharm patients, not to misuse your knowledge for harm. I think every scientist, mathematician should say the same oath. It'll be adapted. And I've given various examples of it in my book on peace treaties. So, that's part of the recipe of how we can solve this problem of the dark use of science for militarism and militarization. I'm also, another part of the forest, I'm just about to publish a journal of the Mary Magdalene Studies Association. I work on multiple, it's like I have an orchestra of projects, and the violins and the timpani and the bass and the drums and so on, they all come in at different times. So in the violin section, I'm working on Mary Magdalene, the probable consort, discuss of Jesus, and the recipient of some of the most inner esoteric Gnostic teachings of Christianity. So, and I'm part of a circle that's been studying this thing for years, and there's some wonderful books being published, research coming out, talks being given, discoveries being made, and in the journal, that's all documented. It's going to come out twice a year. I'm being helped by some assistant editors, and we've had 3 conferences about this so far. We'll have another one in July. Where is that Gnostic teaching about Mary Magdalene? Because it seems to me that's part of the good news that we have to reclaim. If people like Opus Dei are complete fascist right-wing terrorists secretly taking over our institutions and creating things like Brexit and Trumpism, well, how can we counteract that? Where's the authentic church, the liberal church of Christ himself? I don't believe Jesus was a fanatic fascist, believe in me or I'll burn you to death kind of guy. That's not a Messiah. If he was, he's not a Messiah, and the whole thing's false. The Messiah I believe in and love was a genuinely enlightened chap who knew about the Sanatan Dharma in his own way. He'd spent time studying the Hermetic mysteries. He'd probably been off to India and studying the kind of Dharmic mysteries. And he put them all together with his sort of proto-Kabbalistic learning. And there are many sources now saying this. Well, where was Mary? Where does she fit into that? Was she his consort? Was she his goddess? Discuss. And that's what we're looking at. Now, of course, in the Opus Dei world, all that is evil, wicked, sexuality is verboten, etc., etc. But I don't think life is against sexuality. I think life is on the side of love and connectedness of human souls, and that's physical and emotional and spiritual and mental. And that's what love is, and that surely is part of the divine bliss of why we're here. So anyway, that whole Mary Magdalene thing is about to be published, and if anyone wants, they can join the Mary Magdalene Studies Association, which I've set up, with colleagues, and they can get the journal. It'll also be available publicly. Now I want to move on, coming up to the end. I want to make this a shorter talk than usual. I want to use the analogy of the winds, because this is something that came to me in the week. I mentioned it at the end of my Perennial Philosophy conference, but for those that weren't there or won't hear it, I'd like to share that. I think it's an interesting idea because, and it came to me in a dream, which I often get these downloads at night. So one of the things I've been studying for years, and by the way, I've been working on the book on religious maths this last week. I'm working on that every day, very intensively, 4 or 5 hours a day. And in this last period, I've been working on, some really interesting topics. I've been looking at the runes, literature, painting and art history, and today looking at dance. And in each case, I'm looking at how these can be understood both religiously but also mathematically. Dance, for instance, is a fascinating component of all religions, sometimes really important, sometimes sort of in the back. And it's grew out of processions, it's there from Paleolithic times. We know that shamanic dance, soul journeys and so on exist. And it's part of Hinduism, where there's a fine tradition of dancing, and in Chinese religion, Tibet and so on. But mathematicians have also studied dance because it involves all kinds of complex rules of symmetry, patterning, beauty, gesture, all done to a fine art. Ballet is incredibly complex the way it's choreographed. Modern dance, likewise. These are a sort of visual mathematics. So I'm posing questions like, could a modern choreographer invent a modern dance performance of, say, Maxwell's equations, which define the nature of light? I think they could, but it would be very interesting and challenging to see, a mathematician collaborating with a choreographer and producing a sort of ballet like that, or modern dance. I think that would be exciting, and I'd love to see that happen. I think it will, and that's why I'm writing the book, is to encourage those sort of interdisciplinary exchanges, because I think transdisciplinarity is part of the new wave of Sanatan Dharma, you see, because the eternal truth is manifested in all the branches of knowledge: mathematics, history, sociology, philosophy, economics, geography, sciences, etc., etc. They're all manifestations of that core primal vibratory sea of energy in which we live. The Shiva breath, the Shiva Parvati love-making field, whatever you want to call it. We're all products of that eternal thing, and that's manifested in every branch of knowledge. And number is one of the core codes for reading that. So is sound vibration, the different sonic vibrations, which is what the Kabbalah and the runes and the Ogham script all explore. That's what the Druids meant, talking about the primal language before Babel. We still know that, those core signs and sounds of the sonic vibratory levels that the Kabbalists and so on also know. So I've been exploring all this mathematically, and it's really, really fascinating. And during the course of that, this vision came to me, sort of dream vision, which is to think of it all in terms of winds, because a lot of the disputes going on the planet between different religions, for example, or between those who have different views of God, or who have rival and conflicting views of God, or who deny the existence of God altogether, or who say there are many gods. There are all these different interpretations, which I've explored in my periodic table of the world's religions. What this vision enabled me to do was to kind of present in very simple imagery an extremely complex teaching, which is a restating of the perennial philosophy of the Sanatan Dharma. And I think Babaji would approve of this one. So it's very simple. So let's think of spirit, not religion. Let's think of spirit and spirituality. Let's say that Sanatan Dharma is trying to reconcile all the forms of spirituality into one overall matrix of interpretation. I breathe in, breathe out. That's my spirit. I'm speaking to you. That's my spirit. That's my breath infused by my divine intelligence, cosmic intelligence that infuses the sound vibrations and makes them vibrate in a way that your consciousness can understand. That's spirit talking to spirit, right? Now, if I go out on my terrace here in Brexit in France and I feel the wind blowing, it's been a bit windy. It's that sort of spring wind. So I will feel the vibration of that wind, and if I walk in the garden, I'll feel the wind, I'll see it whipping the trees. Now those are my local breezes. That's the local kami of the area. I live in a very beautiful part of the middle of France, Gaul, surrounded by ancient druid tumuli and menhirs and sacred sites, and everywhere there's little dottings of churches and magic groves. So all around here, the little kami, that's the spirit beings of the Shinto religion. It's the Shinto word, which is very, very good. The kami are the local gods and goddesses. And they're the ancient ancestors, they're the accumulated wisdom of the terrain. Now, everywhere on Earth has these local kami. So I don't know where you're listening from, if it's anywhere in the world. You will have in your local rivers, the mountains, the forests, your parks, wherever, there will be kami, which are like the accumulated intelligences of your locality, of spiritual intelligences. Now we can think of them as the sort of collective unconscious of your village or town or your region. Now whether they exist or not in a technically like ontological sense, let's just bracket that question out for the moment, and I'll come back to one at the end, because we need to study what we mean by existence if we're going to talk about spiritual beings. Which is what I have done in my book, Being and Knowledge. I've gone into that in huge detail. For anyone that really loves philosophy, read my book on Being and Knowledge. Then there's local, so that's the local deities, the kami. Then there's the regional ones. So in France here we have these regular winds that come, the Mistral in the south. We have the Sirocco winds of North Africa. In Canada, we have the Chinook, which used to come to Calgary. Blessed Chinook would bring warm air into freezing 30 below Calgary in the middle of winter, and suddenly there'd be warm air like spring. And it was a particular wind that used to come 4 or 5 times a winter, and it would make the winter bearable. Not that Canada winters aren't bearable, because Canada can cope with winter. It knows how to deal with them, unlike Texas, which probably hasn't had a winter like this for ages. Poor people. So, and those regular winds are all over the planet. They have different names. The monsoon winds of India come regular cycle once a year, bringing their thing. Now those are what I call the regional deities. Let's use the metaphor. So the wind spirit is the divine. So we've got the local divinities, and they, by the way, in the Celtic world, they'd be called the fairy beings, the elves in the Scandinavian world. They're the regional elves in the mountain, or the underworld of trolldom and so on. Whereas the regional deities are bigger. They're more like Lu, who was the great Celtic god of the whole of Europe, or Aphrodite, who was the great goddess of love of the whole Mediterranean region. Or Artemis, who was the great goddess of hunting and women and all that. And Apollo, who was the awesome god of prophecy and light and healing and medicine and philosophy. So these are regional gods. These are like super winds that come round regularly to be bathed by the wind of Apollo or Artemis or Aphrodite. That's pretty awesome. Now I would say that Yahweh is another of those regional deities. He was the god of the region of the Israeli tribes, with their sequence of prophets. He was the god of definitely the region of what we now call Israel. And I would say Allah also is another regional deity. He's the wind of the Arabian Peninsula, the people that use the term Allah for their god. I mean, the desert has incredible windstorms. That's Allah's wind, if you want. And now some of these, of course, these different regional gods, then they spread. They Apollo travelled all over the place. And you find little altars to Apollo in the north of Britain and Spain and wherever. So regional gods then can spread, but they remain at their root regional gods. And then, and the same with all the other Indian gods, like Indra or Vishnu or Shiva or Sarasvati. I mean, Sarasvati was a river in India. She's the goddess of that river, who then spreads and becomes the goddess of all wisdom and intelligence. She ends up being a sort of universal archetype, like Athena, who originally was the goddess of, Athens and the Acropolis and the wisdom of the people of Athens. Although some evidence shows that she was actually from Africa. The temple of Athena in Lindos came from Africa. It's very ancient. Martin Bernal said that she was originally a black goddess coming from Egypt and Libya. So there's still details to be worked out by religious scholars. But the point is, these gods they're like the regional winds, and they all blow. That's, they're all doing their thing. Right now, as I'm talking to you, they're all blowing on at once. Now then I want to go on a thought experiment. So imagine you are the planet itself. Imagine you suddenly you lose your body and you become the body of the entire planet. You're Gaia. On your body, which is 22,000 miles in diameter and pretty big, just think about that one. You can do this as a meditation. There's countless winds blowing. There's myriads, millions, possibly billions or trillions of little winds, gusts going on all over the show. Then there's these regional winds that are going on, bigger ones. There might be tornadoes, hurricanes, like super powerful windstorms going on. They're all going on at once. So as you sit in a meditation, being Gaia, or Geb, the Egyptian male equivalent, it's all happening. And if you then say, okay, so I'm going to count up now all those winds, how many are there? That's where I start with my interesting religious mathematical question, right? So there's a challenge to mathematicians and meteorologists. Please count up the number of winds on the planet at any one time. I think it must be in the millions, at least billions rather, or trillions. And then there's also a problem of how we count a wind. If there's a wind coming through my village and it rattles the shutters on the neighbouring house, and then a few seconds later it rattles mine, is it the same wind? Where do we measure it? I'll leave that to meteorologists and mathematicians to figure out, but I would like that number. Anyway, let's call that number X, the number of planetary winds going on at any time. Now, I would say that aggregate is what we call the universal deity. I would say that's the god of Hegel, if you want, or the god of Jung, or the collective unconscious of the whole of humanity, or the god of Plato, if you want, the one, the good. And that all the regional gods, the deities that often make a big song and dance about being very important, are actually regional, local manifestations of that one, like, super cosmic aggregation of all the winds together. And that's the god of philosophers. That's what we've been trying to find out ever since Pythagoras set up his school in Crotona in the south of Italy. It's what theosophists try and find, is that the wisdom of that theos, that ultimate deity. Yeah, and that's, okay, so if we think of the regional or the local winds as manifestations of the collective unconscious in that locality, so I mean, I once shared a flight with a woman from Madagascar who told me that when somebody dies in their villages in Madagascar, they all dream the same dreams. The spirit of that being comes to see them all and says goodbye in the dream world. And they don't just believe it, they experience that. So the karma of that collective village includes the souls, the visions, the dreams of all the ancestors and the people of that village who've been living there for centuries, you know. And it's the same in every locality. So if you're in Japan or China or Tibet or England or Russia or Ireland, you know, it's the local village that's the collective unconscious of those people. But what I'm saying is that it's ultimately the same. And if you're a druid or you're a seer or a traveller and you've travelled to like hundreds of different towns, villages and cities, as that's our duty, we have to, then you realise that there's a commonality, a patterning behind them all, which is what Jung called the archetypes behind. That's what Pythagoras meant by the arche, the numbers, or the arithmi, which are the principles of the spiritual sort of go-betweens between the absolute and the finite, which is where we exist. We exist on that cusp, right? And that's what number, sacred number, is about. Okay, so that's the collective unconscious, the superconscious, if you want, which Ken Wilber tries to talk about in his complex diagrams and so on. That's the sort of highest band. When you reach that level of total windness, you reach enlightenment. That's what enlightenment is. That's what Moses got when he went up Sinai, and he experienced that his revelation came from that absolute, you know, that's what Muhammad got in the cave. That's where the Quran came from. That highest band of collective ultimate consciousness. That's where Lao Tzu believed his Tower scripture came from. It's what all the sages really believe. And I would agree. I would say that all the really great scriptures of mankind come from that collective absolute. But they then manifest down into the locality, the region. And there's something else, which is, and this came up in our talk on Sanatan Dharma, because there's also the space in which all the winds are travelling. Okay, there's the emptiness. Now what that is, I mean, Newton hypothesized this absolute space. And I still don't think his ideas have been entirely superseded. I know that Einstein relativized space and time and made a complex bubble of the whole thing, and I'm not convinced, you know, nobody's ever fully explained Einstein to me in a way that really is either comprehensible or explanatory. It seems to me a muddle. Einstein, you know, the jury's out, and it's been discovered Einstein was a bit of a plagiarist. He pinched his equation E equals mc squared from an Italian. You know, if you go into that, and I've been quite uncompromising in my book on religious maths, yeah. Einstein was a plagiarist. I don't think he was a very original thinker. He pinched a lot of his thinking from Poincaré, a great French mathematician. And in my book on religious maths, you know, I've in one of the kind of visualization experiences, we go on, Einstein, you know, admits, sorry about the plagiarism. So we don't know what space is, you know, we don't know. In the book I've got Newton and Einstein still arguing about it in the heaven worlds. But it is miraculous, you've got to admit, whatever this space is, it allows us all to be and to do our thing, and all the winds can come and play in. And all the planets, you know, we're just one little planet. I mean, when I've described these winds, I mean, okay, that's just one tiny little planet out of 100 billion in this galaxy alone, and then billions and billions and billions of other ones. And by the way, you know, an awful lot of stars have planets around them. Scientists have now discovered that, you know, planet density around stars is very intensive. So there's loads of planets with lots of winds going on. And even on this solar system, like Mars, where we've just landed again, there are huge winds happening. So, and it's all happening in space. whatever that is. And that's shunya. You see, this is where my Buddhist training kicks in, because the Buddha got to this point. He was able to tap into that absolute space in which all the winds are happening. So that's why he was able to say, yeah, okay, the gods, we love them. You know, they're always being windy, they come and go. But actually what you should do as a sage, if you want to be a Buddha, if you want to reach total enlightenment, you have to plug into the absolute behind even the gods. You have to plunge into that absolute shunya, space, emptiness, akash, the zero, to put it mathematically, in which all the numbers manifest. And that's where ultimate peace comes from, and ultimate enlightenment. And you see, there's nothing then to fight over. There's no egotism. There's no, my winds are better than yours, I'm going to attack you because your tribe worships other winds. I mean, it's just completely ridiculous. So you might go and sit and meditate together under the same tree and just laugh. That's where or have a dance, organise a dance party. That's where true religion is the expression of joy and of love. It's when two emptinesses meet and fall in love with each other. That's what life is. That's what true religion is. Anyway, so that's what I've been doing this week. And I think it's absolutely awesome. I love it. And it's such a great fun to share all this stuff with people. I'm deeply honoured to be here on this planet at this time. I really hope we get out of this pandemic soon. Thank you to all the scientists who've been working away at getting vaccines together. I hope they work. I've read some rather, worrying statistics about people dying from them and so on, but fingers crossed. And this is where integrity and truth come in. We have to hope that enough scientists, enough politicians remember the Sanatan Dharma, remember the perennial philosophy, live up to it. I think that's what Biden's trying to do. I think it's what Nicola Sturgeon, in her own way, is trying to do in Scotland, and it's what we're trying to do here in France and the EU. I don't see it happening in the British government at all. They've so lost the plot. They're on, a different planet of lies and deceit. And the sooner they apologise to the British people, let us have a second referendum, salvage what can be salvaged in the United Kingdom, and the Queen really should abdicate, in my opinion, and let someone younger take over. I'm sorry to hear Prince Philip is unwell. I have met him. He was a good man, I felt, but he's been totally swamped by the courtiers of ignorance that flock around them. I feel really sorry for Philip and his family. It's time to liberate, actually, the authentic wisdom that is there, going back to King Alfred, which was the authentic Anglican lineage of enlightened Christianity that it stands for. And that has to be the perennial philosophy that John Dee taught Queen Elizabeth I, I don't know who's been teaching this Queen, but she needs to remember her lessons, is all I can say. Okay, I'm going to finish with a poem, because as a bard, like Jai Shankar, I'm a great lover of poetry. Sometimes you can only say it in poetry. Okay, it's a little poem, but this is all from my recent poems, volume 7. It's called List for Today. 1. To invent a new form of poetry, without words, without numbers, neither form nor shadow, only clear, radiant ideas. To communicate love with a great sweeping gesture, like a bird's beating wings, soaring to the buoyancy of an absolute humility. Here, at the centre of things, surrendered and suspended in the sparkling void. 3. To try to remember the thing I forgot to do yesterday and the day before, which I'm always chasing from behind myself, like a jester in the hall of mirrors, who can never be found. Four, to become a spirit, as a swimmer going down and floating up at the same time. Five, to heal the split between the letters and the spirit, between the language and the mysteries, between the saints and the sages, between the up and the down, the left and the right and the wrong, the black and the white, the yellow and the red, between those who do and those who don't, between the paradoxical and the orthodoxical, between the men and the women, between the sky and the earth, between the sun and space, between time and gravity, between Athens and Sparta, between Rome and Jerusalem. 6, to not forget to rest and just be from time to time. Enough of all this doing. Shalom.